I'm going to mention that this is going to be recorded so that people that miss it can view it on YouTube, and BevCam is broadcasting a selection of these Monday mornings. The last Monday morning of the season will be next Monday on the 22nd. And so right now is my pleasure to introduce Eric Jay Dolin. He is the author of 14 books. He's local, he lives in Marblehead, so he's familiar with the area. And if those of you that were here that were listening to us chat know that he's also familiar with our local libraries. And he's going to talk today about A Furious Sky, which is a finalist for the 2020 Kirkus Prize for Nonfiction, which is very exciting, and congratulations. So I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Let me just set up my share screen. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks to the Friends group as well. And I really wish I could be there, but whoops. But unfortunately, due to the situation that we're in, I can't. It's been very interesting learning how to use Zoom. It's been a surreal experience talking to my computer as I'm doing right now. But after I finish the slideshow, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So if you have some, please save them until then. And I hope that sometime in the future, I'm able to give a talk at the library, hopefully not in the too distant future. But anyway, while writing this book, I came across many dramatic stories. One of them came from the New England hurricane, or the Great Hurricane of 1635. In the middle of August, a ship called the Watch and Wait, a small vessel, left from Ipswich to go to Marblehead. And on board were 23 people, including Anthony Thatcher and his wife and 4 of his children. That night, as the hurricane roared in and they were right off of Cape Ann, the ship was sent up on the rocks, smashed to pieces. Everybody on board died, with the exception of Anthony Thatcher and his wife, who were able to struggle ashore, barely clothed, with hardly any food. And there they survived for 5 days until a fishing vessel happened by. They were able to flag it down and they were brought to the mainland. Now, the Massachusetts legislature, when it found out about Thatcher's plight, in compensation for his grief and the tragedy, they gave him the island, the uninhabited island, upon which he had landed that horrible night. And that island, of course, is known as Thatcher Island to this day. It's part of Rockport. It has these beautiful twin lighthouses on it. Then there's this story from the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926. A few miles to the north of Miami in Fort Lauderdale, there was a couple who was in their house when the hurricane struck. The house collapsed. A slab of cement fell on the husband and he was immobilized. The wife tried to pull him out from under this slab, but was unsuccessful. He begged her to leave as the water continued to rise, but she didn't want to. He kept pleading, and finally she gave him a kiss goodbye and left what remained of the house. And of course, he stayed behind and died. Then, oops, every once in a while, there's a problem with forwarding my slides. So don't worry if there's a slight delay. Then there's this story from a hurricane that probably a lot of you or most people in New England are familiar with. If they're old enough, they experienced it, or their parents experienced it, or they've heard of it. And that was the great hurricane of 1938, which plowed into Long Island and New England. Now, on that morning of September 21st, there was a man on the eastern tip of Long Island who had been waiting expectantly for a package to arrive that was going to contain his brand new barometer. Well, that morning, the package arrived. He opened it up, took out his gleaming instrument, and he got very annoyed because the needle on the barometer was pointing to a reading that was so low that it could only mean one of two things. Either a hurricane was just about to hit or was fast approaching. Yet when he looked outside to the ocean, It was calm, the sun was shining, and the wind was very light. So he sat down to write an angry note to the manufacturer, which happened to be Abercrombie and Fitch. And he drove into town to mail it at the post office. But he shouldn't have been so rash, because by the time that he returned from his errand, both his house and his gleaming barometer had been washed away by the hurricane. Now, A Furious Sky contains many more tragic stories like these, but the book is much more than a litany of death and destruction. There are a great range of captivating themes. There's the intriguing history of meteorology, the influence of hurricanes on the course of empire and the outcomes of war, and the fortunes of individuals adds to the story. Critical innovations in communication, aviation, computer, and satellite technology play an important part, as does the women's movement and its role in the naming of hurricanes. Now, in the end, the history of America's hurricanes forces us to confront thorny questions of how we can learn to survive and adapt to the continued barrage that is sure to come from the greatest storms on Earth. Very weird, the clicker, sorry. Now, hurricanes are an inevitable and painful part of the American experience. Just as we can count on the sun rising and setting each day, so too can we count on the periodic arrival of hurricanes. If you're among the many tens of millions of people inhabiting the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, the Caribbean, or Hawaii, hurricanes are looming threats that might invade your life. The hurricane season officially runs from June 1st through November 30th. In an average year, 6 hurricanes dance over the Atlantic, 3 of which are major hurricanes, defined as having sustained winds of at least 111 miles per hour. Typically, 2 hurricanes make landfall in the United States annually, and a major one pummels us once every 2 years. Now, hurricanes are not equal opportunity offenders. While 21 coastal states are buffeted by hurricanes, residents of Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Louisiana, and South Carolina take the brunt of the punishment, with Florida alone accounting for 40% of all hurricane strikes. Now, here in New England, the place that we're most concerned about, at least most of the people I'm sure watching are concerned about, we only get a hurricane about once every 10 years, or about 10 per century. And I hesitate to tell you this, I don't want to bring bad news, but I can pretty much guarantee that within the next 10 or 15 years, New England is going to get pounded by another hurricane. And what I mean by that is landfall is going to take place within New England. As you may remember, with Hurricane Sandy, we had a lot of impacts from that, but that made landfall in New Jersey, not here. So when the next hurricane is going to come to our region, I don't know, but it will be sometime in the near future, I bet. Now, hurricanes have left an indelible mark on American history. Since 1980, they have accounted for roughly 50% of the cost of all natural disasters in the United States that have exceeded $1 billion. And going back to the late 1800s, hurricanes have killed at least 30,000 people. Now, Furious Sky is the history of hurricanes that have hit what is today the United States. But before going any further, I need to define the term, what is a hurricane? Simply put, hurricanes are violent, swirling storms with sustained winds of at least 74 miles per hour. They generally form where the ocean's top layer, down to about 150 feet, reaches the trigger temperature of 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which gives the heat energy that is necessary to power the storm. 2 other conditions necessary for a hurricane to thrive are low vertical wind shear, which keeps the hurricane from being ripped apart, and an abundance of warm, moist air that rises from the ocean's surface. As that air rises, it condenses and cools, and that forms clouds, and it also releases something called the latent heat of condensation, which gives the hurricane its massive power. Hurricanes can be anywhere from tens of miles in diameter to as much as 1,000, and they can be over 50,000 feet high. They rotate in a counterclockwise direction in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern. They're characterized by extremely low pressure in the center and a relatively calm center that is called the eye, with the most ferocious winds occurring in the eye wall. And here you're looking down on a hurricane into the eye of the hurricane, creates that amphitheater-like space. And believe it or not, in the center there, it is very calm and the sun is often shining. Now, many people have attempted to describe hurricanes through the centuries, including a teenage Alexander Hamilton, who wrote an article or a letter to his father about a hurricane that slammed into his home island of St. Croix in August of 1772. In that article, this is one of the sentences, or a few sentences that were in that article. He said, "Good God, what horror and destruction. It seemed as if a total dissolution of nature was taking place. The roaring of the sea and wind, fiery meteors flying about in the air, the prodigious glare of almost perpetual lightning, the crash of the falling houses, and the ear-piercing shrieks of the distressed were sufficient to strike astonishment into the angels." Now, some local merchants on St. Croix read this letter to his father, Alexander Hamilton's letter, because it was published in a local newspaper. And they were so impressed by his precocious writing ability that they banded together and raised enough money to send Alexander Hamilton to New York City to further his education at a college that later became known as Columbia University. So this letter really changed the course of history. And if you saw the play Hamilton, either in person or on Disney Plus, you will remember that they mentioned this letter playing a seminal role in getting Alexander Hamilton out of the Caribbean and up to New York. Now, hurricanes have had a significant impact on the course of colonial history. For example, in the summer of 1780, two massive hurricanes barreled in to the Caribbean, killing as many as 22,000 people and destroying numerous British and French warships that were in the area. They used the Caribbean as a staging area and also to protect their colonial possessions. Now, these two hurricanes greatly affected the course of the American Revolution. The hurricanes caused the French to reconsider their decision to stay in the Caribbean the following year. So during the winter of 1780, 1781, the French repaired their fleet. And then in the summer of 1781, they decided to go north, both to escape hurricane season and also to help their erstwhile allies, the American colonists, in their battle with the British. By following that course of action, the French played a crucial role in the Battle of the Chesapeake, or the Battle of the Virginia Capes, which ended with, well, the battle didn't end. The battle ended with the French beating the British and the British fleet leaving. But as a result of that, Lord Charles Cornwallis, the leader of the British forces, was ultimately forced to surrender to George Washington and his French allies on October 19th of 1781 after the Battle of Yorktown. And that, of course, was a major turning point in the Revolution, and soon thereafter, peace negotiations got off the ground. Now, of course, hurricanes didn't cease with the founding of the United States, and many hundreds of them have struck America's shores in the past 237 years, including one called the Great September Gale, which is just a hurricane by another name, which plowed into New England in 1815. The hurricane seared itself into the memory of Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., who was only 7 years old at the time and would later grow up to be one of America's most famed essayists and poets. Holmes's 1836 poem entitled The September Gale humorously recounted the passing of the hurricane over his Cambridge home. One of the stanzas told of the storm's dramatic effect on his wardrobe. It chanced to be our washing day and all our things were drying. The storm came roaring through the lines and sent them all a-flying. I saw the shirts and petticoats go riding off like witches. I lost, bitterly I wept, I lost my Sunday breeches. The Galveston hurricane of 1900 leveled the city and killed at least 6,000, maybe as many as 10,000 people, making it the deadliest natural disaster in American history. The Labor Day hurricane of 1935 ripped through 3 government work camps located in the Florida Keys, killing hundreds of World War I veterans who were there to build a highway to Key West. It is still the most intense Category 5 hurricane to hit the United States mainland, with maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour and gusts as high as 200 miles per hour or more. Ernest Hemingway, who lived in Key West at the time, was one of the first responders to offer help to the stricken. After seeing the death and destruction on Lower Matecumbe Key, Hemingway wrote, "The brush was all brown, as though autumn had come to these islands, where there is no autumn. But that was because the leaves had all been blown away. The biggest bunch of dead were in the tangled, always green, but now brown mangroves. You found them everywhere, and in the sun, all of them were beginning to be too big for their blue jeans and jackets that they could never fill when they were on the bum and hungry." And part of the reason that Ernest Hemingway was there is not only because he lived in Key West, but he was very close friends with a lot of these World War I vets. And those of you who know the history of Ernest Hemingway know that he also participated in World War I in Italy. And he used to have drinks with a lot of these vets at Sloppy Joe's bar in Key West. So he had a personal connection. Now, one of the work camps, a doctor came upon a veteran named Elmer Cressberg, who was impaled by a 2x4 that went clear through his chest and out the back. Now, Cressberg was still alive and amazingly calm given the situation. The doctor offered to give him some morphine before he pulled the board out, but Cressberg refused, telling the doctor it didn't matter since he was going to die as soon as the board was removed. What he really wanted was a last drink, and he asked for 2 beers, which were quickly provided. After finishing them, Cressberg said, "Now pull." The doctor did, and Cressberg died. The Great Hurricane of 1938 delivered a body blow to New England, resulting in damages of $300 to $400 million and killing 680 people, making it the deadliest natural disaster ever to strike New England. The actress Katherine Hepburn, who had already won an Oscar at this point, was at her family's Victorian summer home at the edge of the water in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, when the hurricane roared in on September 21st. She and 5 other people in the house, including her mother and brother, escaped as it was being ripped apart and torn from its foundation, and they sought refuge in a nearby inn that was on higher land. Looking back, Hepburn would later recall, "We saw the house slowly turn around, sail off to the northeast, and start down the brook which fed the swamp lagoon. It just sailed away, easy as pie." Later, Hepburn called her father in Hartford, Connecticut, to tell them about the house's fate, and also that they had all survived, including his wife and daughter and 1 son. And he responded, "I suppose you didn't have brains enough to throw in a match before it disappeared. I'm insured for fire." The Menemsha hurricane Hurricane Carol, which struck the eastern tip of Long Island and then plowed into New England in late August of 1954, left 60 people dead and caused nearly $500 million in damage. The most iconic casualty was the spire of the Old North Church in the north end of Boston, which tumbled to the ground. It actually was the second time that this spire had tumbled from atop the church. The first time was in the early 1800s when another storm, likely a hurricane, did the same kind of damage. But after Hurricane Carol, the people who ran the North Church decided they weren't going to let Mother Nature mess with them again. So the steeple that you see now has a steel girder skeletal system that can stand up to anything that Mother Nature has to throw at it. Hurricane Camille in August 1969 clobbered coastal Mississippi. Excuse me. Of the many people who suffered during Camille, none had a greater burden to bear than Paul Williams Sr., the caretaker of the Trinity Episcopal Church in Pass Christian, Mississippi. That night, the night that Camille came ashore, Paul, his wife Myrtle, and most of their children and a few grandchildren decided to shelter in the auditorium that was attached to the church. The hurricane demolished the auditorium, and in the end, 11 of Paul's children perished, along with one grandchild and his beloved wife, Myrtle. Hurricane Andrew struck Miami on August 24th, 1992. Whoops, why that does that. It tore a wide swath of misery through Miami-Dade County. A staggering 126,000 homes were destroyed, making 160,000 people homeless overnight. Total damage approached $27 billion. Zoo Miami was especially hard hit. About 300 rare birds were lost when the zoo's aviary was damaged and ultimately destroyed. To shelter the Caribbean flamingos from the hurricane, the staff of the zoo herded them into the men's bathroom. And that's the picture that is shown here. Now, hurricanes rarely strike Hawaii, but there have been a few of note. The most memorable being Hurricane Iniki, which made landfall on the Hawaiian island of Kauai on September 11, 1992. It killed 6 people and cost $3.1 billion. It also forced director Steven Spielberg to cancel the final day of shooting for the film Jurassic Park. Everyone associated with the film crowded into the ballroom of the Westin Kauai Hotel to take shelter from the storm. During the hurricane, Spielberg led a cameraman down to the docks to get some footage of the massive waves crashing into the island. And that footage actually makes it into the movie that you see on the silver screen. The crew survived, and a few weeks later, Spielberg filmed one last scene on Oahu because all of the sets on Kauai had been destroyed. At the end of August 2005, Hurricane Katrina ravaged parts of Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, costing $125 billion, making it the most expensive hurricane ever to strike the United States. It left about 1,800 people dead in Mississippi and Louisiana, with Louisiana claiming the lion's share. Ground zero for Katrina was the city of New Orleans, which suffered the most devastating blow. Multiple levee failures around New Orleans left 80% of the city, most of which is 6 feet below sea level, inundated with water that was up to 10 feet deep. Tens of thousands of people were stranded in their homes, surrounded by a toxic brew of contaminants, which one local observer labeled hazmat gumbo. 25,000 people took shelter in the Superdome. With no running water, conditions quickly deteriorated and were described as horrific. It took the better part of a week for a wide range of organizations and individuals to rescue or respond to the many thousands trapped in homes, hospitals, and businesses. And it wasn't until Monday, September 5th, that the Army Corps of Engineers was finally able to close all the levee breaches, and it took about another month for the water in New Orleans to be pumped out. 7 years after Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy struck New Jersey and New York on Monday, October 29th, 2012. Because it struck close to Halloween, it was called the Halloween Horror or Frankenstorm. It killed more than 150 people and resulted in $65 billion worth of damages. Sandy's waves pounded the shore with such force that their vibrations were picked up by seismographs 2,500 miles away in Seattle. New York City was particularly hard hit. Many subway lines and automobile tunnels were flooded. At one point, close to 1 million Con Ed customers in and around the city lost electricity. And the hits just kept on coming. The 2017 hurricane season turned out to be one for the record books. In the end, there were 10 hurricanes, 6 of which were major, and 4 of those hurricanes roared ashore. But what really set 2017 apart was that 3 out of the 4 hurricanes that made landfall were major ones. Each of those category 4s with winds of at least 130 miles per hour. Never before had there been 3 category 4 hurricanes to strike the United States in a single year. The damage attributed to hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria totaled $265 billion, making 2017 the most expensive hurricane season on record by far. Harvey dumped more than 50 inches of rain on Houston, and in Nederland, Texas, it dumped 60.8 inches of rain within the span of about 2 days, an all-time record for a single storm. In the Houston area alone, the weight of the water caused the crust of the earth to sink nearly an entire inch. Hurricane Irma maintained winds of 185 miles per hour for an astonishing 35 hours as it sailed across the Atlantic, setting a world record for sustained hurricane intensity. Irma's winds, when it struck southern Florida, destroyed 50% of Florida's orange crop. Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico as a strong Category 4 hurricane with winds of up to 155 miles per hour, and it dropped enough rain to go up to 3 feet in some areas. Maria damaged or obliterated virtually every human-made structure outside of the capital of San Juan and many within the city's borders. And it knocked out power to the entire island, leaving 3.4 million residents in the dark, some of them for many, many months. The death toll from Maria has spawned considerable controversy, with estimates ranging from 1,397 to about 4,600. Now, while Furious Sky details some of the most destructive hurricanes to reach our shores, it also recounts pivotal discoveries over the past 3 centuries in the field of meteorology, aviation, and communications, which have greatly improved our ability to understand, monitor, and report on hurricanes. For example, after studying a hurricane in 1743 that moved from Philadelphia to Boston, Benjamin Franklin, our founding scientist, became the first person to realize that hurricanes had forward movement and that a hurricane's winds could blow contrary to the direction in which the entire hurricane was moving. During the Great Storm controversy in the mid-1800s, arguments between amateur and professional meteorologists helped to develop the basic image of a hurricane as a swirling, moisture-laden storm with winds the velocity of which greatly increase as one approaches the center of the storm until one enters the calm, clear, and surprisingly beautiful eye. The advent of the telegraph, then the radio, followed by hurricane hunter planes, which can fly into a hurricane and send back real-time information to the people on shore, and Earth-orbiting satellites all contributed mightily to our ability to track hurricanes from inception to dissolution. Such advances, combined with vast improvements in computer-based weather prediction models, means that we have advanced warnings of a hurricane's strength and the timing of its arrival. There have also been dramatic changes in the way that we identify hurricanes. In 1953, the Weather Bureau, the precursor to the National Weather Service, began naming hurricanes after women. This decision angered many who thought it was inappropriate, if not downright insulting, to name hurricanes in this manner, and they asked the Bureau to reconsider. One woman said she would rather have an unnamed hurricane hit her house than one named after one of her husband's former girlfriends. The Bureau, however, would not be swayed. It stuck fast to its naming system, making it permanent in 1956. Protests died down, that is until Roxy Bolton spoke up. Bolton is shown here talking to Eleanor Roosevelt, probably in the late 1940s or 1950s. Now, Bolton was a vice president of the National Organization of Women. In 1970, she urged the National Weather Service to stop naming hurricanes after women. She was tired of hearing media accounts in which female-named hurricanes were variously described as witches, capricious, furious, bad girls, unladylike, vicious, and treacherous. She said women are human beings and deeply resent being arbitrarily associated with disaster. Bolton offered some alternative naming schemes. Hurricanes could, she said, be named after birds, or how about politicians, since they seem to love having things named after them. She also recommended that hurricanes could be called himicanes instead. The service refused to budge until Jimmy Carter was elected in 1976, and soon thereafter, he appointed Dr. Juanita Krebs to head the Department of Commerce, the first woman to do so. A self-described feminist, Krebs took up Bolton's cause, and in 1979, gender equality won out over tired bureaucracy. From that point forward, Atlantic tropical storms and hurricanes would alternate between male and female names. And as you all know, who've been following this very active hurricane season, we have gone beyond the 21 names that are allotted for tropical storms and hurricanes, and we're well into the Greek alphabet. And I understand that either today or tomorrow, new Hurricane Zeta is going to be forming in the Caribbean, and it's going to plow into Louisiana, it looks like. It will be the fourth hurricane, if it does, that hit Louisiana this year, setting an all-time record for a number of hurricanes to strike that coast. Now, meteorologists have not only been interested in forecasting and naming hurricanes, but for a while they wanted to control them. From the late 1940s to the early 1980s, there were various government experiments to study whether the seeding of hurricanes with dry ice or silver nitrate could weaken them. None of them succeeded. Since the mid to late 1900s, many other methods besides cloud seeding have been suggested for controlling and even eliminating hurricanes. Some of the most fanciful ideas include flying an enormous fleet of propeller-driven planes around a hurricane in a clockwise direction to unwind the storm, or towing icebergs from the Arctic to the tropic to cool the ocean and sap hurricanes of their energy. Then there is one of the most popular suggestions of all: nuke them. Just drop a nuclear bomb or two into a hurricane to disrupt it and hopefully rip it apart. Unfortunately, or fortunately for us, that hasn't been done because it would not work. Hurricanes are way too powerful. The nuclear bomb, even multiple nuclear bombs, would be swallowed up by the hurricane, and then we'd have to deal with the issue of radioactive fallout once the hurricane hit land. Now, the cycle continues. Every year, a new hurricane season unfolds. No matter what an individual hurricane season brings, one thing is certain: the United States will continue to be pummeled by these tremendous storms. Excuse me. And because of global warming, hurricanes of the future will most likely be worse than those of the past. Global warming has already made the impact of hurricanes worse. Because sea level has risen as a result of the thermal expansion of the oceans and the melting of glaciers, storm surges associated with hurricanes are higher and more destructive. This is a picture of Situate, actually. And just to give you an example, sea level off of New York City was a foot lower than it is today about 100 years ago. So if the same hurricane hit 100 years ago versus today, it's starting with a foot higher, and that has a major impact on the land that is struck. Now, a growing number of studies have found strong evidence linking global warming to increased precipitation during hurricanes. And the reason is that warming leads to more evaporation, and warmer air is able to contain more moisture or higher concentrations of moisture, which can come down as rain. Considerable research also predicts that warmer oceans, which provide more heat energy to fuel hurricanes, will make the winds produced by these storms even more powerful. Thus, under warmer conditions that predictions say will be the norm towards the end of this century, it is likely that hurricanes will be stronger and wetter. And there's also an increasing number of studies that seem to indicate that in a warmer world, hurricanes are likely to move more slowly, or they're going to linger longer. So we're more likely to have these.
Longer.
What's that? Oh, I just heard somebody talk, sorry. Anyway, so we might, if a hurricane lingers longer, that means there's more time for rain to fall on an area and more time for wind to pummel the structures, which is not good. Now, at this moment, nobody can say with absolute certainty exactly how hurricanes will change over time as a result of global warming. Scientists would be the first to admit that there are still many unknowns, as well as limitations in data and modeling that make it exceedingly difficult to predict the impact of a warmer world on these massive storms. The mounting scientific consensus that an increase in global warming will likely make future hurricanes worse, however, is not encouraging. But even if global warming causes no difference at all in hurricane behavior, society still has to grapple with a hurricane-filled future. And as more and more people move to the coasts, the potential impact of hurricanes will only increase. As this book was heading into the final stage of production, Hurricane Dorian riveted the nation. Beginning in late August of 2019, Americans watched the round-the-clock coverage of this rapidly intensifying storm as it marched across the Atlantic. Each day, reports became more alarming as Dorian not only grew into a monster Category 5 hurricane, but also appeared to be heading directly for the east coast of the United States. But first in line were the Bahamas, parts of which were utterly destroyed by Dorian, which essentially stalled in place for an excruciating 40 hours before moving on as a Category 2 hurricane. Some models said it would strengthen and still hit the east coast of the United States, and that prompted mandatory evacuations from Florida to Virginia. Over the next few days, Dorian hugged the coastline, briefly regaining Category 3 status as it moved over warmer waters, then dropping to a Category 1 hurricane before it made its only landfall in the United States, grazing North Carolina right around Cape Hatteras, before it zoomed off in a northeasterly direction, making landfall for a second time in Nova Scotia, where it knocked out power to roughly 400,000 people. While Dorian's impact on the United States was significant, it was virtually nothing compared with what happened to the Bahamas and what might have happened if the hurricane had slammed into the United States instead of skirting the mainland, clipping North Carolina, and heading off to Nova Scotia. This time, America was lucky. But if the history of US hurricanes tells us anything, it is that such luck will not last. And this is my last slide. This is me in 1991 when I had brown hair. My wife worked for the state of Massachusetts. We were engaged at the time, and part of her job, she had to go down to Falmouth right after Hurricane Bob and assess damage to trees in the area. And this is on the beach in Falmouth, where a summer cottage has been leveled by the hurricane. And I have to point out that Hawaiian shirt was one of my favorite shirts at the time, but Jennifer didn't like it. So soon after we got married, it was donated to a thrift store, along with my suede vest, which I also love, but my wife didn't like. Anyway, that's the end of the slideshow. Here is, I'm going to stop share so I can go back, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I will point out, if you can see on the screen, if you see me, you see that painting on the over my right shoulder of the lighthouse, Martha's Vineyard, Edgartown Lighthouse. That painting is done by my daughter and is in my book about lighthouses. And there is a painting, I started a tradition back with that book, that my daughter, who's now 23, would paint something for each one of my books. So there is one of her paintings in the hurricane book, and there was one in the pirate book, Black Flags, Blue Waters. But anyway, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And if anyone wants to pop them into the chat, I will monitor those and read those out.
I have a question.
Sure.
We've at our house here have read all of your books and love them, and usually see you in person every time you're at Marblehead or Beverly or whatever. And
Okay.
I have been reading this one the last couple of days.
Great.
So what I wanted to ask you was, first what I wanted to tell you is my husband Jim is sitting here with me too, although he can't see it because he's over to the side. And I did say to him the other day that in thinking about this book and thinking about your writing, you do remind me a lot of David McCullough. And I mean this as a compliment because both of you pick a subject that's usually rather broad, but then you take examples that are really very pertinent. And as the reader is reading the book, we feel as though we are right there, whether in your case, it's in a hurricane or building a lighthouse or trading with China, you know, in the case of David McCullough, building the Brooklyn Bridge or the Panama Canal or something like that. So it just really kind of hit me the other day how similar in some ways you two are. And I mean that as a compliment. I know he's a lot older than you are, but I do read it as a compliment. And the other thing, so I definitely have to ask you is, what is your next topic?
Okay, before I answer that, thank you. I would like you to attend every one of my talks and give that little speech. I do take it as a compliment. I actually corresponded with David McCullough earlier in my career. I asked him to blurb one of my books, and he wrote me back a very nice letter on a letterhead that he actually designed. He's a little bit of an artist, and it was a beautiful letter. And he said he really doesn't blurb books much at all, and only very close friends, it seems. But he said he knows about my books, and one of his sons was a big fan of mine and came to a bunch of my talks. So I did have a nice little connection with McCullough. Another author that's mentioned a lot is Kurlansky, and Todd and stuff. But I take that as a compliment. That's what I try to do. I try to tell stories that I would like to read. I'm a general reader. I'm not trained as an historian. I have an undergraduate, a master's, and a PhD in basically public policy and biology. So I came to this out of a passion for history, and I love writing, and the kinds of stories I like to read are like David McCullough books, or books that really tell you the story, a narrative arc, and keep you interested. I really dislike dry, academic, turgid books. But my next book has a lot about New England in it, and I'm working on it right now. It's about privateering during the American Revolution. So it's about the role that our privateer, our sort of rebels at sea, played in the winning of the American Revolution, and also life during the American Revolution on shore. And Beverly was a major port for privateering and had some very famous privateers and interesting characters like Hugh Hill who are associated with Beverly. So I have been reading, oh my goodness, have I been reading? I think I have over 400 books, old books before 1923, digitized and downloaded on my computer. And I took notes from almost all of those. I've been visiting the Peabody Essex Library, Peabody Essex Museum Library, which recently opened, to get books. I was telling Ona that I had a PhD dissertation from 1939 done at Harvard. There are only 2 copies in the whole United States. And my local library was able to get me a copy from a library in Vermont. So I've been steeped reading huge amounts of material, and I'm just about to begin writing it. And it's going to be a bear because there's so many different tangents, but it's fascinating. And I think it's going to be a really exciting, dramatic story. So it won't be out for about 2 years. So you have to wait.
Well,
but thanks for those nice comments.
Thank you so much. And I can see the Mark Kurlansky connection too, because we have read Salt, we've read Cod. I read another one he just did not long ago about milk.
Right.
I've also read one about 1968.
Right.
So I can see definitely the connection too.
Well,
thanks so much. And we'll be looking forward to your next book.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
In the comments here, well, we have wonderful thank you. And then we have, after the last hurricane that ends with the Greek letter Z, what will they start naming the next hurricane that comes after?
I don't know. I think they're gonna have to make it up. I don't think there's an official, they've never got, this is as far as we've gone, this Zeta, and there's still quite a few letters left in the alphabet. If we have Hurricane Zeta, well, Tropical Storm Zeta, I think we've tied 2005, which is the other year in which we had this many tropical storms and hurricanes. If they ran out of Greek alphabet letters, I don't know 100% what the answer is, but I don't think there is another list that is just sitting out there. They'll have to come up with some other names. I don't know.
Go to binary.
Binary, yeah, maybe they'll name it after birds or or something. Hopefully we won't get that far. I don't think we'll get that far by November 30th, but could be wrong. It's a strange season.
And then we have, thank you for an interesting talk. Hope to hear from you again.
Thanks.
We'll save another.
Okay, if there are no other, I have nothing, let's see anything else I can say. I'm in my office. This might be interesting. I've been a full-time writer since 2007. I had a lot of jobs before then. If you go to my website, you can see my checkered career. It looks like I can't keep a job, but actually I was never fired. I just bumped around a lot, did a lot of policy work, a lot of biology work, a lot of writing. And but I've been writing since 2007, and we've been in this house in Marblehead since 2002. And my office used to be in the basement, which is a finished basement, but it's a little dark and dank. And I'm sort of an introvert by nature, even though I give, I like meeting people, but I like being alone. And my wife was getting concerned that I was spending too much time in the basement. So this was our garage. And those of you who live in New England know that a lot of garages here are rather small. So we bought the house, we pulled our station wagon into it, and we could barely open the doors on either side. So we never used our garage for a car. We just used it for storage. And finally, about 5 years ago, Jen said, let's turn that garage into your office. So now I'm above ground. I've got a beautiful bay window here, another window here. It's very light. And this is sort of my Victorian cabinet. You really can't see, well, you probably can. I have a lot of I have a lot of stuff in my office. I've got probably about 40 different things framed and on the walls. It looks like you're walking into a 19th century museum where they have everything covering everything. And I just love collecting stuff, and I love historic items and stuff. And I have stuff related to almost all my books. I don't have anything specific related to hurricanes, but I've got sperm whale teeth. I've got some scrimshaw. I've got lighthouse paraphernalia. I've got pirate bandanas and pirate plaques and stuff like that. So this is my favorite room in the house. And this is where I spend an inordinate amount of time. So it's a little peek into the writer's life. David McCullough has a nice setup on, I think it was in Martha's Vineyard. I don't know if he does it anymore, but he had a house there, and he had a little writing shack, which was about 20 or 30 steps from his main house. And I know a few writers, I've read about a few writers that have that kind of setup, especially in New England, where they have a little writing shack that they go to write. So this is my writing shack.
It's a very nice background. It looks like it's Zoom ready. You were prepared for 2020 with it. It's
yeah, Zoom ready. I've got sperm whale plaque over there from Nantucket. that print over there next to the lighthouse print means a lot to me, only because I was a very serious seashell collector. I actually worked in the mollusk department at the Harvard Museum of Comparative Zoology. And when I was in college, I thought I wanted to grow up to become a malacologist, which is somebody who studies seashells. So I found that print on Nantucket. It's Nautilus pompilius. It's the chambered nautilus and then spondylus. I don't know which spondylus, but it's a jewel clam above it. But that's a print from a book from the early 1800s, hand painted. Just one of my favorite possessions, because I love shells. If you could see over here to my right, I've got 2 cabinets full of seashells. I didn't travel very far. I'm very poorly traveled. I'm hoping when I get older, I can convince my wife to go travel. She's seen a lot of the world, but I didn't. My family didn't travel much. so I used to trade seashells with people from all over the world, including a leper colony in the Philippines. My parents would help me put together boxes full of clothes, and we'd send them to this leper colony, which was run by, I think it was Catholic sisters, I'm not sure. And we'd send them there. And then a few months later, we'd get boxes from the Philippines of stinking shells. They didn't clean them that well, but we'd open the box and there'd be 50 seashells in there, some of them still decomposing. And I remember the first time we got that box, my mom called our local doctor to see if I could catch leprosy from touching the shells. Luckily I couldn't. But anyway, and the last thing I'll mention is those are, because some people, if you can see them, they're political campaign buttons from presidential elections going back to the late 1800s. I got, Jimmy Carter, there's a big peanut, there's Nixon, there's Clinton and Gore. It's bipartisan. I've got sort of each, at one point I tried to collect buttons from each major candidate for each election, but I stopped collecting things about 5-6 years ago, because you get to a point in life, I'm in my 50s, and I don't want any more things. 90% of the things we have, our kids aren't going to want. And so now I try to spend what money I have on experiences. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has shut that down. I'm hoping we're out of it sometime. Anyway, that's it. So I gave you a brief tour of my collecting life in my room.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And we have a few more comments that are, the gist of it is, thank you. That was a great talk.
Sure.
Everyone's reading list has gotten longer. Great conversation.
Oh, I have to say one of the things, since you're just in Beverly, very close by, is if you go to my website, which is just my name, Eric Jay Dolin, D-O-L-I-N, E-R-I-C-J-A-Y-D-O-L-I-N. Not only can you read the introduction to most of my books to see if you like what the book includes, there are a lot of fun pictures on there and book trailers, but also if you're interested in getting a special gift for somebody, I do sell signed copies of my books. And since if you live in Beverly around here, you can come by and pick them up. So if you're interested, just go to my website and there's a thing that says, a tab that says signed copies. So I'll inscribe it with anything you want. I once had a guy ask me to sign a book. I couldn't have written this book without you. So I'll sign pretty much anything as long as it's not abusive. Okay, well, thanks for listening, and I wish you the best the rest of this year and next year and sometime in the future.
Yeah.
I'm going to come to Beverly Library.
Yes, yes. We'll have an event in person someday.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.